Welcome to the Feehery podcast brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my colleagues John Easton and Adam Belmar. We all have friends and family who live in Florida, so we send out our prayers to them as they deal with Hurricane Irma. This looks every bit as serious as what happened in Houston with Harvey, so please take care of yourself this weekend. Theory 1. You don't need a weatherman to tell which way the wind blows. Here's my theory. Climate change is real, it's serious, and policymakers have to start thinking about ways to deal with it. We're going to spend more than $200 billion in federal money dealing with floods in the south and fires in the northwest. We need a comprehensive strategy to deal with the costs associated with mitigation and prevention, and that's going to cost money. So, John, I was talking about this because of the big hurricane coming. We got the fires in the Northwest. We got a lot of costs. The Freedom Caucus is angry about having to pay for all this because, and they have a point. We've got huge deficits. A lot of Republicans just don't believe that climate change is real, and it may not be real, and maybe this is all a fantasy. But we do have these disasters that we have to deal with. You're an Oregonian. You have these wildfires in the western part. I was at a hearing this week, and Greg Walden talked about this. It's kind of close to his home, so that's why he was talking about it. And we're going to pay for that, and this is why the costs keep coming up. What are your thoughts on just not only climate change, but also the wildfires in the West, and how we come up and pay for all these things? We just put it on the credit card forever and ever?
Well, I think that disasters in the United States have long come under the jurisdiction of Congress, dealing it in an emergency way and what's called a supplemental appropriations package. So I think they'll keep doing that, and I think I'm fine with that because you can never plan for what's coming, whether it's a tornado, a hurricane, a tsunami. And you're right about the fires in the West. One thing that I know dealing with those fires from a Senate office perspective was there was never enough money in the Forest Service budget, in the Bureau of Land Management budget, to get these planes off the ground, to be dropping the fuel retardants, because everybody wants these fires out. And some of them probably shouldn't be put out right away, but everybody wants these fires out. It takes a lot of money. It is costly. There's never enough. So you are right. We do have a budget issue with this. This happens every single year, but I think it's going to continue going on the credit card.
So you think putting it on the credit card? This is one of my thoughts, and maybe this is crazy. We have all these infrastructure needs because the sea level is rising, Adam.
Well, we have infrastructure needs regardless of whether.
Well, that's true, but we have it in New York, we have it and we're going to have it in Washington D.C. We have it definitely in Florida. How about this, Adam? And you can tell me that I'm crazy, and I appreciate that you will tell me that. How about if we have a carbon tax which will raise about $1 trillion to pay for infrastructure? You think that's doable?
Well, I think that anytime you talk about raising taxes on Americans, there's not quite a majority in Congress who wants to do that. So yes, I think it's doable. I wouldn't recommend it. I hope that it doesn't happen. And I appreciate where you're going with all of this, but I don't think the president got us out of the climate accord just so we could levy a carbon tax right now and make it a business killer.
Well, listen, I think that he got out of the Paris Accord because the Paris Accord was crap.
I agree.
It was a cover for all those big companies and it had nothing to do with anything, and it really had no really teeth to it. But I do think that climate change is real. I think that we do have bleaching of coral. I think the temperature of the seas is getting hotter, which increases all this hurricane activity. And I think, I'm not sure if we need to do something about this, but the world seems to be coming to an end.
Yeah, I don't. I would say that there is so much going on right now that we're all becoming aware of a lot of facts. And for many of us, it's a confluence, and we can have them fit any sort of theory that you have, and this is the Feehery podcast. So I respect your theory. I just dismiss it as being silly. But no, I honestly would just say that we're having a really rough go, but I don't necessarily see this as the come to Jesus on, this is settled, it's climate change, and therefore whatever we're seeing now can be mitigated in the near term by anything that we.
All right, let me throw another theory out there. If you don't want to pay for a carbon tax to pay for infrastructure dealing with climate change, how about if we raise the gas tax to pay for the fact that we don't have we have crumbling roads. Would you support that, John Easton?
See, now you're talking. Now you're talking. I think that we need to start a little smaller than what you're talking about in terms of a larger carbon tax to address a kind of an amorphous problem we're having with our climate. I think that a gas tax it's tied directly to the usage of our roads, to our bridges, and it would directly, deal with something that, very simply, something that is associated with driving.
So, and we'll just turn to one quick topic. The one thing we can say about these hurricanes is it's blown the congressional agenda completely off course. And
Nice metaphor.
You like the metaphor, right? Now we're going to be dealing with, we had a down payment that's going to pass, but now we're going to have, what do you think the supplemental is going to be, John? Is it going to be, I said it's going to be over 200. Do you think that's realistic?
That is realistic. As I think most people know by now, the deal calls for this initial $15 billion to deal with that. Some of that goes to FEMA. Other parts of that goes elsewhere. But you're looking at Harvey, an enormous cost, all that water and dealing with all that flooding. It's going to be painful. And the insurance, I was talking to somebody at Travelers the other day, the insurance isn't covering a lot of the damage down there because most people don't have flood insurance, especially in Houston. I mean, it's one thing in Florida, it's another in Houston. So you're going to have high costs there. Irma just looks like a devastating hurricane. So, and in a much more populated area. I know Houston is populated, but very dense population in South Florida. So the costs are going to be even greater with Irma. So yes, I think you're talking north of $200 billion.
So the people who didn't have flood insurance were not in a floodplain.
Right.
So they never expected to get this kind of flood, and they're on top of their roofs going, what the heck happened? And so the flood insurance program, which still has to be reauthorized, this is still a deal, but the disaster assistance is going to be direct grants to these people who need help because their whole lives are ruined, right? Their houses are ruined, and who ultimately holds the why would you pay the mortgage if your house is ruined, right? So that's why they have to give grants to these people.
I
right?
think it's a very interesting point that you make on paying the mortgage, paying the rent. I've heard a lot of media this week talking about what rights you have as a homeowner, as a mortgage holder, as a tenant. You lose that if you stop paying the note. And so many people here, as we're at the beginning of September, who have lost everything, can't get back either to the house or perhaps even to the job, they're at wit's end, but they're also at a point so critically that they still must make that payment. They retain a great deal of flexibility and rights and possibly even compensation if they maintain that good relationship with their creditor or their landlord. And it is just, it's staggering, John. I mean, the federal government, I am very, very glad that they came quickly to depoliticize as political a bombshell as this deal has been in the last couple days. But I think people in the affected areas are starting to feel like, yes, it looks like the government is starting to do something that is actually going to impact me, and that makes people feel good in a time when they need something to make them feel better.
Theory 2, Trump is looking mighty presidential. Here's my theory. The president has done an excellent job showing compassion and leadership in these times of crises. And I thought he did the right thing when he cut a deal with his new friends, Nancy and Chuck, even though that made a lot of Republicans very unhappy. Matter of fact, he had 90 Republicans vote against this deal in the House. I think 18 senators voted against it. So they're still not happy with President Trump in this deal, although I don't think he had much of a choice. Adam, are you tired of the president winning it?
I'm definitely not tired of the winning yet, but I'm prepared to be tired of the winning. And I have been as shaken as many observers in Washington over what transpired. And I think that if you get the right solution, but you have grave concerns over how it came to be selected, i.e., was it the president just flying by the seat of his pants, not listening to anyone, never having floated this, never even having thought this through, and yet still he seems to have netted out in the right place?
Well, I think that's right, and I think the American people are delighted by this,
Yeah.
although they don't really care that much about the upsetness. I was talking to a friend of mine this morning who came in from Florida, And what he was telling me is the base not only likes it that he screws over the Democrats, he likes it when Trump screws over the Republicans because the Republican Party
love that.
is so unhappy. The normal Americans are so unhappy with the Republican Party. John, let me just throw it to you real quick. What are your thoughts on, will this have any long-term implications for the Senate? I know that they're still pretty angry with this president.
No, I don't think so. And let's face it, nobody cares about how these deals really get done. What are we talking about here? We're talking about funding the government.
Yeah.
We're talking about restoring our ability to pay our debts. And we're talking about emergency assistance for Houston and Harvey and Louisiana. These are must-do things, and it got done by what? By saying, oh, well, I'm going to work with these two leaders. That should be okay. That shouldn't create too much angst. I actually think that President Trump, I don't know if he's being presidential or not, that we'll have to see. But I think he spared these guys a lot of pain, especially Leader McConnell and Speaker Ryan, because this could have been a very painful process for both leaders, having to deal with their own caucuses. I think President Trump reached across, said, let's get this done, we'll do this.
Well,
I think they were bewildered a little bit, but I think he spared them pain. Now they can move on. Maybe tax reform gets off the ground because of this.
When I worked in the leadership, Dick Armey, who was the majority leader at the time, said the pain is required, the suffering is optional.
Right.
And so this was there was some pain here, but there's no suffering because he made a decision very quickly. And Adam, I will say, I was talking to some high administration officials today, and they said the number one thing that will make this president look presidential is not all this domestic stuff.
How did you know they were high? Did they smell like
hey.
Sorry.
This is a family podcast.
Hey, come on. I will say that the number one thing they think is going to make this president look presidential is not on the domestic stage, it's North Korea. And they are really, really worried about what's going to happen in North Korea. But, you work for a president. What makes a president presidential?
Well, I think there are a lot of visual trappings that help confer the sense of leadership and what we think of as being presidential. And I've always said this, and it takes a lot of consistency and effort to achieve that. And that's separate and apart from the behavior of the commander-in-chief. In this case, I just would say that I think the president looked presidential because he was decisive. He wanted to make a deal, and guess what? So did someone else, and so he made a deal with them.
One thing that still gets me about this president and this White House is every big deal that comes out of there, somebody's not on the same page. Some high-ranking official is not on the same page. This time it was Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. He just was not on the same page as the president. Can you imagine George W. Bush, who Adam worked for, would not be on the same page as Secretary Snow or Paulson? It's just really unthinkable. But here we are. And today, and I'm talking about the day of the announcement. I mean, if they may have disagreed with him behind closed doors, but day of, everybody's on the same page.
Who was the first Treasury Secretary in the Bush administration?
He was never on the same
Never
page.
on the same page. We forget those days.
That's
and
right.
You wrote in the Feehery earlier this week, who the hell knows where we're going to be and whose side anyone will be on in December. So it was expedient, and I think I agree with every point you made about what needed to happen and the sparing of pain for Republicans, the 90-some who voted against in the House. But we may be replaying this tape and have seen this president set everyone up for a real big, sad Christmas.
I think it's going to be a great Christmas because Christmas is always great. But I will say that, except, December's a terrible month because there's so much crap going on. You can never keep, anyway. I will say that one of the thoughts coming from the White House, from Mark Short, who was one of the legislative guys who quoted, this clears the decks for tax reform. And I do think that is still the number one legislative agenda item for this White House. And they think that by getting this short-term deal, all of Congress can now focus on tax reform. Now, we'll see. It's still hard to do tax reform.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe that. I mean, I think you can say it, you can assert it. But
if you saw the president on Twitter, and he uses Twitter sometimes to just kind of blow off steam, but often he uses Twitter as a riding crop. And you could see him right across the Congress saying, come on, let's get this going, guys. Let's get this tax reform. John, what do you think about tax reform real quick before we get on the next subject?
I think that some would say, oh, this is too complicated to get this done with the balance of the year. It's such a compressed schedule that they have in Congress right now. But I think if they do make it simpler, and then maybe it turns into a little bit of reform, a little bit of tax cut, that's okay. But they're going to need to do that. They're going to need to do it quick. I know that the Senate wants to go through regular order. They want these hearings to go, get them done, get stuff on paper, get it moving. I think they can do something. It just can't be. It can't be huge.
Point, though? There is no piece of legislation. Nobody's looking at a document. Nothing has been submitted, and so it's very esoteric, despite all the work that's been done and the carve-outs that people.
But that's not unusual. I mean, when they passed tax reform in 1986, no one really knew about it until like 2 days before, and then they just passed it.
Because they don't want it. They want anything out there to shoot at.
And what they don't want is aggressive social media campaigns that you design very well, and we do design this at EFB, by the way, that stops bad things from happening. And there are some bad things out there that are happening. We can go through a whole list
there
of
was some message consistency this week. The president was out in North Dakota, ostensibly talking about tax reform and his 4 principles, and they released almost concurrent with the kickoff of the speech, a video out of the White House that clearly stated, in fact, more clearly than the president in his a bit of meandering speech out there, the 4 principles of tax reform. And so, in some ways, they're getting on the stick a little bit more.
I think they are getting on the stick. This is a big agenda item. There's a lot of interests that care about this, and it's tough. The president's not going to get his 15%.
No, but no one ever really thought, except for him, that he was, right?
Right. Theory 3, DACA on the docket. The Attorney General announced that DACA, the Obama administration executive order that allowed non-citizen children of illegal immigrants to stay in the country, he announced that program was ending. The president, after doing that, then urged the Congress to get its act together and pass legislation that actually passes constitutional muster and gives these folks the legal status they've all been asking for. My theory and my prediction is that DACA will be reauthorized with internal security measures and a mini kind of immigration reform, but it's going to be very difficult because other interests, like tax reform, want to get piled on this thing. And I will say I have a friend of mine who's the Irish envoy to America, and he wants to take care of the 10,000 Irish immigrants who are here, overstayed their visas. So that's one of the many things that they want to get in there. John Easton, do you think that DACA gets reauthorized?
I think it has a very good chance. And to your point about the president often on Twitter kicking Congress in the pants, I think this is a good example. And he may have done Congress a favor by doing it this way and forcing a little bit of bipartisan work. Because I think this could be that opportunity where they come together and they do a little bit of work together. There's incentive there, and I believe that they should take care of this, and it would be good for the Republican Party to be leading this effort in Congress.
Two points here. One, I feel very much like this is a tactic that I use at home with my kids. I'm taking your cell phone away. You want it back? Let me tell you exactly what you've got to do before you're getting anywhere near this thing again. So DACA was important to a lot of people. It got taken away, but I really do want to give it back to you, but you're going to have to earn it, and we're going to have to work through some things. Here's the second part, and I read a little bit about this. I don't think we've all talked about it, but there's something very interesting about the underlying motivations for what transpired here on the president's decision, because many people have made a great deal about my heart bleeds for these people, and then he just kind of screwed them. But I think it was a little bit more self-serving for the president than that. It was a real threat to the unitary executive theory, because the DACA executive order that was promulgated by the president, the 44th president of the United States, if it had been struck down by a court, would have really undermined this president and future presidents' power to act in that way.
That's an excellent point. The problem with the Obama administration's executive order is it wouldn't have passed the court's test. They would have thrown it out. They especially would have thrown it out because the Justice Department would have said, I'm not defending this. There's another part of this. The Trump coalition is not necessarily on board with the president on DACA. I mean, they really don't want these people to be legalized. They certainly don't want them to be legalized without, having some real kind of border security and internal security that goes after people that are here illegally. So this is not necessarily a slam dunk for the Congress, but in the business community, they all love the Dreamers, and they all want to be on the Dreamer side. And many of the Dreamers work for these businesses. And, the part of that is the business community sells to a lot of these folks, and they understand how important they are as customers. But they also think it's the right thing to do. But a lot in the Trump base are not necessarily there. John, you've seen the Congress deal with immigration quite unsuccessfly over the last 15, 20 years. Is it really going to be possible, or can these groups come together? To Adam's point, can they have this deadline, they have this burning platform, will this be enough to compel action?
I think that as long as they don't try to do this the way they've done it before, they have a chance. I think that if you just step aside and just look at this in a raw political way, look at Trump's political future. He obviously has to go beyond this 30% core supporters to be reelected. And, is DACA one of those places where he can step out, from them? He's got to step out from them somewhere, because he's got to appeal to independents. He's got to appeal to some Democrats, like he did in the 2016 election. But this could be a test for the president, where so far his coalition, his core supporters, have not abandoned him. Really, sure, yeah, there's been a little bit of erosion. But like he said, he could shoot somebody in Manhattan and get away with it.
If you didn't believe that a year ago,
you
better
believe it now.
Yeah.
So I think that, but to your point, John, about immigration, is that the threshold? If he crosses that threshold, does he get burned on it? The wall, DACA, I think that is some really tricky area for the president.
The president won based on one promise, that he was going to build a wall and Mexico was going to pay for it. This immigration thing was a real thing during this campaign. And I've said many times I disagree with the president on immigration. I think immigration's a really important part of the lifeblood of the American experience, and also an important part of the economy. That being said, illegal immigration, when it gets to the tipping point, and we might be at the tipping point, does drive down wages. And so we do need a reform that legalizes people so that we can get wages back up. And the other thing is that there are less illegal immigrants coming to the United States because they think that Trump's going to kick them out. Adam.
I just wanted to bring a topic to the table, attendant to DACA. I've got a friend to everyone at EFB Advocacy, Joe Matthew, who is the managing director and the host of Morning Edition at WGBH in Boston. He did a very interesting interview earlier this week with a professor of social sciences at MIT. And in some ways, the issue was a little bit master of the obvious, but I thought it was very powerful. When you think about the 80,000 people in America who fall under this category.
800,000.
I'm sorry, 800,000. You're absolutely right. Who fall into this category of protected, deferral against childhood arrivals. All of a sudden, their world has been completely turned upside down. They are scared. They don't have any of the normal sort of life-affirming safety feelings that any citizen would hope to have. They might not be able to go to school. They might not be able to go to their job. They're worried about getting deported, their loved ones, etc. What happens to people in these situations? Well, they get depressed, and they start to do behaviors that are sometimes self-harm. We also think about what that might ultimately mean for people who are starting to feel irrational and disenfranchised, might do harm to other people. We often talk about the need for thinking about mental health reform and supporting people who need help after shootings and other things. We have just turned the world upside down for a whole lot of people.
Well,
I think someone somewhere should be thinking about these people are hurting, and what comes next may be something we should have thought about before we did this.
Well, but the problem is, Adam, I hear what you're saying on all that, but this program was not constitutional. It would not pass constitutional muster. We need to get it reauthorized, and I think the president did the right thing by saying
you're right.
We have 6 months to get it done. Congress get it done. Congress should have done this a long time ago. They almost passed it several years ago. They got to get this done because they got to fix a broken immigration, because the broken immigration system is driving down wages. And I think that the president, because he has credibility on the right on this, what you said, he can shoot anybody in Manhattan. He pardoned Joe Arpaio. So he's a fellow traveler. So I think the president can get away. And what I wrote earlier this week, this is a Nixon goes to China moment. Because only Richard Nixon could have gone to China because he had such credibility on the right. I think only Donald Trump, because he has such credibility on the right, can pass immigration.
That's true, and he probably knows, and as the three of us know, members of Congress are so, in the Republican Party mostly, are so spooked of this issue. They have been burned on this before. Some of them ran on this issue just like Trump did. So it's radioactive, and it's going to take a slightly different issue, maybe like DACA, and a slightly different president, maybe like Trump, to get this done. Maybe the time is right. But I have been through it, and it is the ugliest form of politics and you can imagine on the Hill with immigration.
And you know who's not on board with this? Steve Bannon. And you know where Steve Bannon's now? He's at Breitbart. Do people care about Breitbart? I don't think so. But they are a pain in the ass.
Well, we see excerpts coming out of this Charlie Rose interview, which is going to air on 16th.
And now he's attacking the Catholic Church. Come on, Bannon, come on. You want to be excommunicated? Is that where you're going? Anyway. All right, finally, we like to highlight a local business here at EFB. And today we're going to highlight Bullfrog Bagels. Adam Belmar, please take it away.
Well, Bullfrog Bagels is the closest thing to a Jewish deli that you're going to find right here in Eastern Market in Capitol Hill. And they make all their own meats in-house. They make all their own bagels. They're the kind of place that opens up early in the morning. And you know when they close their doors? When they're out of bagels, which is not a real big problem. It's not like they're sitting there late trying to sell bagels. They go fast. And they got some great people over there. And I'm over there a lot. It's way too many carbs. I don't want to talk about that, but I will tell you this.
You don't want to have a carb discussion now?
No, I don't. But I just love the service. I love the food. And I ran out of here the other day to go get some lunch. And I turn around and I run into my good friend and partner, John Easton, who's also come in right behind me to enjoy the Bullfrog Bagel. They introduced us to the nitro-infused coffee from our previous episode.
Which we highlighted last week. Right?
Yes, and for those of you who think we're drinking something other than coffee, you'd be wrong. The EFB mugs, which are excellent for business.
And I will say that to attest to Adam's loyalty to Bullfrog Bagels, when I was in there with him, they said, "Oh, you're a friend of Adam's? You get 10%." Yeah. So they also...
I always come back with extra bagels.
They treat their customers very, very well.
I like Bullfrog. You know who else loves Bullfrog Bagels? Jack Feehery.
Yes,
my
Jack
son
is a man of fine taste.
Loves Bullfrog Bagels. He begs to go there. Anytime we have a sleepover at our house, we got to go get bagels for the kids. They don't want pancakes. They want Bullfrog Bagels.
I want to do a follow-up just for a second, and I also want to mention for those in the Belmar family who might actually be watching the Facebook Live, our very first podcast that was available on Facebook Live. I'm wearing a hat. It is the Dunbar High School hat. I picked it up last Friday at Dunbar High School's home opener. We are proud sponsors of a fellow who was working here over the summer, who we really care for, who's on the team. They did not have a very good opening game, but hey, neither did Brady last night. But they're going to make their second foray this evening under the Friday Night Lights. We wish them the best, and we're representing Dunbar High School pride on the Feehery podcast.
All right, go Dunbar, go Gonzaga, go Irish this weekend. The Ducks playing?
They're playing Nebraska, and the wildfires are burning so hot and so heavy out there that they have talked about either not relocating but rescheduling this big college football game.
Is that even possible at this point?
It is possible. They've already moved an NFL game to week 16, wow. I think.
How many
Miami.
Did you get like 100,000 people at a game like that in Oregon?
Not quite, but we get a lot. Yeah.
So thank you for joining this special presentation of the Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy live on Facebook. EFB means
excellent for business.
Yes,
baby.